A couple months ago, I was at a party and they had very interesting decorations. For example, on many of the tables there was a kind of second table on top of the table. So like imagine how a bunk bed is two beds on top of each other. So these tables were like bunk tables, except there was no table surface on the top table. It was just the legs of the table and like the rim of a surface connecting the legs to each other on top. So it was like an outline of the second table that was placed on top of the table. And I've never seen anything like that. And off of these top tables, there was a bunch of test tubes hanging down. Some were filled with water and others had flowers in them. It was very interesting to stare at and examine throughout the party. But this was some real world building juice. It flooded my brain with many ideas, and so I'm going to share some of them with you here. So in my setting, I decided that every table for eating meals is a square-shaped bunk table. So that means like two tables on top of each other, right? So the bottom table is the one where you eat on, and the top table is there for purposes that I'm going to get to soon. But now I'm going to talk about the bottom table first. So the bottom table is a square, right? And there's a small square cut out of the center of the bottom table where they place an idol statue thing of the Mealgod, so that it's as if they're eating together with the god. And just a quick aside, people who can't afford a whole statue just use an egg-shaped idol with the name of the idol carved in instead. And I talked more about this concept in my statue status video, which I have linked in the cards and in the description if you want to know more about that concept. But anyway, back to the main topic. For reasons I'm not going to get into here, they cook their foods in sand baths, and so once they finish cooking, they move over the sand-containing basin with the pot of food on it to the table, and they place it on top of the idol's head. Then they anchor the pot to chains or what have you, which are connected to the four corners of the top table, so that they can lift off the pot from the sand bath a touch so that it doesn't continue cooking while they're eating there at the table. The sand bath is just there to keep the food warm and for support in case the chains get weak, but they don't want it to continue cooking. The sand will still be hot when they put it at the table, so they don't want it to continue cooking, so that's why they have the chain, so they can like raise it up a little bit. Anyway, once the pot and the sand bath is in place, then the meal begins and people can start taking food from it. So it's going to be like the serving pot in the middle of the table, on top of the Mealgod, and hanging off of the top table. Alright, so this makes it feel like the table is the house of the Mealgod, you know, with the top table being like a roof and also quasi-walls, right? The legs of the table makes it feel like some type of enclosure, so it feels like the house of the Mealgod. And with the pot of food on top of the idol, that makes it feel like the god is partaking in the eating too. So to go off of that, I thought there can also be little cups, like test tubes, filled with water, hanging all around the edge of the top table, like there was at the party that inspired this. And maybe they have like, let's say, one test tube for each day of the month. And then after every meal, the people take one of the vials and dispose of the water ritualistically by pouring it onto the idol, like maybe in its mouth, so that the idol can be seen as eating and drinking from the food above it, like the god is partaking in the meal too, you know, because it's the meal god, and so that's like, you know, it's kind of like serving it. So this is how we serve the meal god. And then since there's one for every day of the month, on the first day of every month they'd refill all the vials with water again, so that they can have for the next month enough water to pour onto the god every day. Though the system seems kind of messy though, because where would the water go after being poured on the god, right? It would just drip on the floor. I'm not sure how that works, so I thought maybe instead they ritualistically pour out the vials of water on the sand bath instead of on the idol. And they pour it out in a circle, because why not? And this ritual might have evolved from a time when they wanted to cool down the sand by pouring water on it, and then it became like a thing you do in service to the meal god. But then I thought the sand in the basin would become muddy, and so that's also messy, so I don't really like that idea either. So then I thought maybe they take out all the leftover food from the pot, which they put away for future use, and then they ritualistically pour the water into the pot itself instead of on the idol, which again could have evolved from just wanting to cool down the pot after they finish eating the meal, or from a way to clean off the pieces that stayed stuck to the pot, or anything else really. But yeah, that was another idea I had. But another idea I had, which I like the most, is that instead of water, they put the, let's say, 13 most common and most important fruits and vegetables in these vials hanging down from the top table. So like potatoes, onions, carrots, olives, spike of wheat, a bunch of grapes, etc. Things like that, you know? And this makes the meal god feel at home, being surrounded by the common foods that the diet is based on and that everyone lives and survives on. So that was an interesting idea. And they would ritualistically get rid of the food items every week or so and replace them with new ones because they would start rotting, and that wouldn't be very sightly. I just don't know yet exactly what kind of ritual that would entail, but that's an idea that I have. And then on holidays, instead of hanging the most common foods, they can change it up with hanging the special foods that are eaten on that holiday. So like, for an example, for the Americans, like on Thanksgiving, it would be like a turkey drumstick or whatever. I don't know much about Thanksgiving. Maybe some pumpkin stuff on Halloween. You got the idea. Alright. Now, personally, one of my favorite parts of world building is the evolution of things. So I couldn't just let this ritual and bunk table just exist in this world with no explanation as to how this could have formed. So here's one thing this bunk table can have evolved from. So first, they started putting the Mealgod idol in the middle of their tables so that they can worship it while doing meals. Then it became common to build tables into a bunk table shape so that they can use the top layer to store pots and pans and spices and foods and things. And then they could have started hanging the serving pot off of the four corners of the top table, since the top table was there anyway, available for a pot to be hung off of it. You know, it's like free real estate, might as well use it. Then, the bunk table started being seen as the house of the Mealgod, so they thought to beautify it, / to make it feel more homely to the Mealgod, so they started to not store the various kitchen things on top of the top table anymore, because it's the Mealgod's house, and it might not be respectful. Except for some of the most common food items they still kept storing there, which they were able to justify keeping there because they thought the Mealgod would appreciate it, because it is what the diet is based on, what they eat the meals from. Then, once much of the most common food items were normalized to hang there, they started adding things like a spike of wheat, which would never have been stored there when it was just a storing place for foods, but now that it transformed into a place to show off the most common foods, they felt that they should place all the relevant foods there, including things that are not edible directly, like a spike of wheat, but which are important for the diet, like a spike of wheat. Yeah. Anyway, now at first, they put these common foods into the pots and pans that were just hanging down from the top of the bunk table, but then over time, it became a thing to store them into specific pots only, and these pots got some sort of symbolism attached to it, and then over more time, when people would fashion new pots to hang these foods off of, they would make them to be more suitable for holding these food items, and less for actual pot use, because they would never actually be used for cooking anymore. They were only used for storing these food items. So over time, features that had once been on these pots for some practical purpose turned into stylish beautifications, and then other features were slowly added to make it more suitable for its new purpose. So eventually, these pots became a whole new specific type of vial that are now designed specifically for storing these most common foods and nothing else, and it became unrecognizable which sort of pot it had evolved from originally. And I love these types of things when culture evolves something away from what it had originally been designed for, and then no one can recognize the source, and it becomes opaque and things like this. It's one of the reasons I love evolving things, and also evolving language and things like that. It's really fascinating stuff. Anyway, just to make this world feel more alive, I decided that some related cultures still use bunk tables to store kitchenwares. They don't have it as the house of the Mealgod. They never turned it into the house of the Mealgod. And other cultures use the top of the bunk table to leave over food for the gods. So they also transformed it away from being a storing place for kitchenwares, but they use it in a different way to serve the Mealgod. And then other cultures flatten the bunk table so that they eat off of the top table, and then they leave over the food for the gods on the bottom table, because in their society, lower is more respectable. And then other cultures convergently flatten the bunk table also, and they also eat off of the top table, but they use the lower table for storage, not for leaving over food for the gods. So there's a lot of variation in this, and so if there's like an alien visiting the world, it would actually look like it's lived in. Hopefully that's the idea, because you see a lot of cultures with similar items, but slightly different. And this is one of the things that I love most about world building. It's to make these little variations and evolutions of things. And I said that a few times already, so I'm going to stop saying that. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing to share. And I don't know, what do you guys think? How would your cultures utilize a bunk table? Would they store things on top? Would they use it for something else? Yeah, let me know. And also, do you find something I said really stupid? Let me know that too. And as the wise OSP says, and yeah.
Drink
World building
juice. It'll quench you. Nothing's quenchier. It's the quenchiest.